Hi students, welcome to lesson number 26 on slums and urban problem. Introduction. Slum population is a serious problem of the urban areas of India. A large population of Mumbai, Kolkata, Chennai and Delhi lives in slums, despite several government housing policies. The conditions in slums are deplorable. The settlements are built in congested areas near railway lines, industries and markets. The settlements are built with gunny bags, polythene sheets, gunny bags which are not only unhygienic but also leads to various other complications such as fire accidents, flooding, etc. Poverty is an important factor that determines the objective economic facts and subjective group standard. Low income forces people live in slums. Slum residents are negligent and do not have mind dirty. They have neither money nor time to clean their area or clean themselves. Lack of basic infrastructure like drains, drinking water, electricity and location gives the slums a very ugly picture. There are no proper sanitation facilities and people tend to defecate in public. The slums constitute the most important and persistent problem of urban life. They are the chief sources of crime and delinquency, of illness and death from diseases. The objectives of this lesson will help the students to understand the concept of slum, urbanization and slums, types of slums, functions of slums and various approaches to combat the problem of slums. Now, the slums as an urban problem. According to 𝗪𝗏𝗔𝗧, a slum is an area where the urban poor resides and usually have no access to tenure, rights and are forced to squat on vacant land, either private or public. The UN operationally defines a slum as one or a group of individuals living under the same roof in an urban area, lacking in one or more of the following 5 amenities such as: first one, durable housing, which consists of a permanent structure providing protection from extreme climatic condition. Second, sufficient living area, that is no more than 3 people sharing a room. Third, access to improved water, that is water that is sufficient, affordable and can be obtained without extreme effort. Fourth, access to improved sanitation facilities, that is a private toilet or a public one shared with a reasonable number of people. And fifth, secure tenure, that is a de facto or de jure secure tenure status and protection against forced eviction. The Government of India Slum Area Improvement and Clearance Act of 1954 defines a slum as a predominantly residential area in which light or sanitary facilities or any combination of these factors are detrimental to the safety, health or morals. According to NSS's National Sample Survey, a slum is a compact settlement with a collection of poorly built tenements, mostly of temporary nature, crowded together in unhygienic conditions, usually with inadequate sanitary and drinking water facilities. Such an area is considered as a non-notified slum if at least 20 households live in that area. Notified slums are those areas notified as slums by urban local bodies or development authorities. The vast majority of the city ward migrants belong to the working class and find it difficult to secure accommodation within their means. Therefore, they squat on every open space available nearby their workplace and construct huts with cheap temporary building materials. In this way, slums grow in number and population. Total and slum population in India, according to size class of towns during 1991, showed that 41% of the total slum population was residing in million plus cities, where 27% of the total population of India resided. However, cities with population between 0.5 to 1 million have only 9% of the total slum population, where 20% of the total population was residing. Further, cities with population between 0.3 to 0.5 million had only 6% of total slum population, where 19% of total population was residing. This shows that cities have population between 0.5 to 1 million and cities with population between 0.3 to 0.5 million have very less percentage of slum population, whereas million plus cities have more percentage of slum population. It reveals that the opportunity in the medium cities is less than that offered by the million cities. Now, we will understand what are the different types of slums. The first one is the original slum, which is an area which from very beginning consisted of unsuitable buildings. These sections are beyond recovery and need to be raised. The second type of slum consists of slums created by the departure of the middle class families to other sections and subsequent deterioration of the area. The third type is the most unpleasant type of slum. It is mainly a phenomenon of transition. Once the area around a main business district has become blighted, physical and social deterioration spreads rapidly. This kind of slum teems with accommodation for the destitute, home of prostitution, beggars, homeless men, habitual criminals, chronic alcoholics, etc. This type of slum clearly requires defined rehabilitations. Now, what are the characteristics of the slums? Slums vary from one type to another, but certain general patterns of slums are universal. Although the slum is generally characterized by inadequate housing, deficient facilities, overcrowding and congestions involve much more than these elements. Sociologically, it is a way of life, a subculture with a set of norms and values, which is reflected in poor sanitation and health practices, deviant behavior and attributes of apathy and social isolations. People who live in slums are isolated from the general power structure and are regarded as inferiors. Slum dwellers in turn harbor suspicions of the outside world, and some of the features of the slums are: the first one, housing condition. In terms of the physical conditions and housing standards, it is important to keep in mind the comparative nature of the definitions. A slum should be judged physically according to the general living standards of a country. Slums have commonly been defined as those portions of cities in which housing is crowded, neglected, deteriorated and often obsolete. Many of the inadequate housing conditions can be attributed to poorly arranged structures, inadequate lighting and circulation, lack of sanitary facilities, overcrowding and inadequate maintenance. The second type is overcrowding and congestion. A slum may be an area which is overcrowded with buildings or a building overcrowded with people or both. Density does not always result in unfortunate social consequence. The issue is primarily one of overcrowding. Congestion is again a judgment about the physical condition of the building in terms of high density per block, acre or square mile. William F. White in 1943, in his well-known sociological study, that is the Street Corner Society studied in Boston North End, stressed upon the importance of overcrowding as a creation for measuring slum conditions. Some slum areas like in Delhi have 40,000 people per square mile. Third characteristic is the neighborhood facility. A poor slum is invariably associated with poor facilities and community services. Along with shabbiness and dilapidation, schools are of poor quality and other public facilities are often insufficient. Streets and sidewalks often go unrepaired and rubbish and garbage are infrequently collected, adding to the undesirable environment. Shortage of water, electricity and sanitary facility are common in most of the slums. The another characteristic is the deviant behavior. A high incidence of deviant behavior, crime, juvenile delinquency, prostitution, drunkenness, drug usage, mental disorder, suicide, illegitimacy and family maladjustments have long been associated with slum living. It is a fact that vice may be found in slums, but is by no means confined only to the slums. Due to lack of money and power, often slum dwellers are proved to be pressurized by the goons of upper classes to commit crime. It is a vicious cycle for the slum dwellers. The another characteristic is the culture of the slum. It is a way of life. Slum differs widely with respect to the social organization of the inhabitants. They range from the slums in which the inhabitants are strangers to one another to the family slums in which there is a wide acquaintance between the inhabitants. Slums inhabited by immigrant groups may have a firm social organization. Culture might be defined as a system of symbols or meanings for the normative conduct of standards having three distinct properties. It is transmittable, it is learned, and it is shared. The slums has a culture of its own, and this culture is a way of life. This way of life is passed from generation to generation with its own rational structure and defense mechanism, which provides the means to continue in spite of difficulties and deprivation. It is the habits, customs and behavior pattern people have learned and which they hold that move them to act in a particular way. Although these cultural patterns are typical of the slum, from ethnic groups to the ethnic groups, from one society to another. The other characteristics is the apathy and social isolation. Every residential area within the modern city tends to be socially isolated from others, partly by choice and partly by location. The slum is especially so as it is inhabited by the people of the lower status. The chief link with the rest of the community is their identification with labor market, but there may be an additional link through politics. A slum also has an image in the eyes of the larger community. There is a societal reaction to slum dwellers. The non-slum dwellers often associate the physical appearance and difficult living condition of the slums with belief in the natural inferiority of those who live in slums. This reaction has important consequences in the social isolation of slum dwellers and their exclusion from power and participation in urban society. The slum dwellers often lack an effective means of communication with the outside world. Because of apathy, lack of experience in communicating with outsiders and their own powerlessness to make their voice heard. William F. White stated that although the North End slums studied in his work on the street corner society was a mysterious, dangerous and depressing place to an outsider, it provided an organized and familiar environment for those who lived in it. Now, we will try to know the various functions of the slums. The slums have met various needs and have served several useful functions for the slum residents. The most common functions of the slums have been to provide housing for the lowest income groups and migrants in the city. The slums also serve as places where group living and association on the basis of villages, regions, tribes or ethnic or racial groups may develop. White found an organized way of life in slums, which offered satisfaction to its residents. The slums also perform a function as a type of a school to educate newcomers to the city. It gives them a place to become oriented upon arrival, to find first jobs and to learn the ways of city life. Another important function of the slum is that of offering a place of residence to those who prefer to live an anonymous life, which includes migratory workers, criminals, chronic alcoholic and workers in illegal enterprises. Now, we will try to understand the approaches to combat slum problems. Some experts advocate the policy of slum clearance, while others believe providing welfare services to slum dwellers. Still others stress providing greater economic opportunity for slum dwellers. All, however, have serious limitations as solutions either alone or together to the slum dwellers. The traditional welfarist approach advocates the policy of destroying the slums, tearing it down physically and redevelopment with subsidizing housing. It is believed that providing welfare services to slum dwellers is the best way to bring about changes in slum areas and to solve the slum problems. This traditional approach to slum problems through clearance and redevelopment with subsidized housing has been criticized in its application to the developing countries. As the cities in underdeveloped nations raise their standard, the poor people from rural areas flock to the city slums. The subsidized housing projects will make cities more attractive, and the number of poor rural people arriving in cities will become difficult to handle. So, the only way to reduce urban slum areas is to raise rural living standard to those of a city. Slum clearance, however, is not exclusively a matter of replacing standardized housing with new planned slums. In fact, proper orientation of residents to a better and organized way of life and to the maintenance of the entire neighborhood, it is essential, and this orientation requires the system of education and motivation of all the people, men, women and children to the fundamentals of personal hygiene, home management and environment sanitation. There is no question that measures to bring about improvements in economic condition will be of great value to slum people. This includes more adequate wages, guaranteed minimum income, indiscriminatory employment policies, accessible and inexpensive credit, program to train and retain youths and adults, more effective training for certain occupation, and improve social security and public assistance. But there is another aspect of the welfarist approach to slum problems. Geeta Diwan Verma has highlighted this issue in her work in Slumming India, where she argues that the real problem is not the pervasive urban squalor offends us all, but rather the moral and intellectual bankruptcy that sustain it. She states that for the urban poor, minimal landless options outreach services instead of hospital, street education instead of proper school, slum upgrading in the place of housing all have become very fashionable. They are also one-way streets. Once all urban land is lost to less essential, more glamorous uses, there will be no turning the slumming clock back. After all, it is impossible that an IIM built on an excessive 200 acres of land or a new-fangled cyber park or any of the plush farmhouses larger than ceiling limits will be dynamited to make room for TB sanatorium or a municipal school or a low-income housing projects. And if and when our welfare state happens to change its mind about what is needed for urban welfare and to stop urban slumming. According to her, even competing interests in urban resources, the state should make planned development a fundamental need of urbanites, calling for a high degree of responsibility on the part of those in charge of urban governance. In such a set-up solution like clearing a few slums or building a few tenements for the poor will touch only the fringe of the problem, and it will take the existing social setup for granted. Urban renewal programs based on this assumption are far from the real answer. Urban community development offers a new development approach to some of the problems of urban areas in general and of the slums in particular. It involves two fundamental ideas. First, the development of effective community feeling within an urban context, and the development of self-help and citizens' participation of individual initiative in seeking community integration and change. In other words, this approach relies directly on the slum dwellers themselves. If their apathy and dependency can be overcome and replaced by pride and a sense of initiative, the slum dwellers can make good use of solving their manifold problems. The approach to the problems of city slum through urban community development involves the following elements. First, that is the creation of a sense of social cohesion on a neighborhood basis and strengthening of groups, relationships. Second, encouragement and stimulation of self-help through the initiative of the individuals in the community. Third, stimulation by outside agencies where initiative for self-help is lacking. Fourth, reliance upon persuasion rather than upon compulsion to produce change through the efforts of people. Fifth, identification and development of local leadership. Sixth, development of civic consciousness and acceptance of civil responsibilities. Seventh, use of professional and technical assistance to support the efforts of the people involved. Eighth, coordination of city services to meet neighborhood needs and problems. Ninth, provision of training in democratic procedures that may result in decentralization of some government functions. The main objective of urban community development programs is applicable to the slums are: development of community feeling, second, self-help improvement of a person or a group of its own contribution and efforts and largely for its own benefits, indigenous leadership and cooperation between government and the people in the use of services. The Marxist and socialist approach to the problem of slums clearly points out that if only the land in urban areas is nationalized and removed from the orbit of market operation, this single step, which does not require resources but only breaking away from bourgeois norms of private property and legitimacy on remuneration to unearned income occurring to ownership, will remove half the problem of the urban areas by ending all activities that have developed around land as a marketable commodity. Abolition of private profit seeking agencies for constructional activities is another essential step for the solution of the urban problems, especially slums. Only public assurance and provision of work to every able-bodied worker can provide the vast variety or majority of non-propertied classes the purchasing power so necessary for survival. This assurance can be given only if employment in production, distribution and services is freed from market operation of capitalist competitive economy. An economy based on social ownership of the means of a production and a social development that does not treat human beings as commodities. Thus, urban slums are marked by deplorable living environment and often marked by lack of civic amenities and facilities, leading to environmental degradation and higher incidence of morbidity. To summarize, slums in cities are the worst form of struggle for the teeming masses of people who cannot afford anything better. It is a remarkable, dilapidated, fragile structures which house a high density of population. Slums, however, are not just physical housing colonies filled with dirt and disease, but is mentioned a way of life. It is a distinct culture where it is difficult to say whether people make slums or slums make people. Thank you.